All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and bore white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Oh, we've got some topics. We're kind of continuing on actually two of our last episodes, which is Andrew Tate
Hmm.
and the propaganda, because they've all come together because once again, Sam was right. I'm wearing my Benevolent Savages t-shirt again today, and part of my mission here is to hope for a world where I never have to wear this damn shirt again, right?
Mm.
Because I know what it means. And so I guess let's jump right into it. We have no comments from other episodes to go through, but in our last one where I was talking about propaganda, I brought up the Matlock show and how they're still holding on to propaganda of how horrible it is to be a woman in the workplace. Like it's
Mm.
1960 again, right? And we cautioned on, okay, so culture is upstream from politics and what sort of policies can come from this, right? And we were speculating a little bit. But enter another show. The show is Adolescence on Netflix. And lo and behold, later that day, I was skimming the news and look what we have. This is from the Daily Mail. Please forgive all the advertisements that are popping up because this is the internet of today. But schools to give boys anti misogyny lessons to stop toxic masculinity in wake of Netflix hit Adolescence. So, what did I say in the last episode about Matlock? Oh, you're using a fictional story to say this is the way things still are, you know, because you can write a script to make it that way. Well, that's what we get with Adolescence. It's about a young middle class white boy who is listening to, and this is where Andrew Tate comes into it, right wing, misogynist, red pill, add whatever uh, adjective you want to that uh, personalities and ends up stabbing a little girl in the process. So, and to quote this article here, the drama released 10 days ago was the most watched show on Netflix worldwide last weekend, gripping audiences with its sobering portrayal of how social media and misogynistic influencers can impact young boys. Again, fictional tale.
Fictional, except that, as has been pointed out ad nauseum, especially Carl Benjamin, who became known as Sargon of Akkad. He had a big YouTube channel for a long time, and he now does a podcast called Podcast of the Lotus Eaters with several other British um, talking head type people, and they have been pointing out this show was inspired by an actual event,
Mm-hmm.
but what they don't want to talk about in the show, or the makers of the show, is the ethnicity and origin of the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm.
As Paul Chato,
We'll get
uh,
to that here in a
yeah.
second with some of the
So,
data here.
so
Let
as
me just skip ahead to that.
Paul Chato had a funny video out about, oh, wow, they finally reverse race swap someone. I wonder why that might be.
Yeah, so we're gonna go to Alexander Datesike here on or Datesike on Twitter, excuse me, X, Twix. Alexander, he's out of UT laboratory with David Buss, which is probably one of the most fascinating laboratories you have in universities today because they actually tell the truth and do real science. That's awesome. He usually deals with the dating world, but he's with another guy I'm going to bring up here in a second, who is the foremost, which you have to wonder somebody's motives to be in this industry, but the foremost researcher on incels. And two things about that is again, why did you get interested in that? And second, why is a grad student the foremost researcher on a topic instead of actually a whole lab somewhere, right? Especially a topic this big. So, but he posts here, if you want to understand the manosphere or the red pill from a class perspective, it is important to understand that it does not derive from the upper or middle classes, which in the show, his first point, the show Adolescence, uh, created a fake white middle class family, but the real youth individual it was based on was a lower class immigrant and an ethnic minority, to your point. Uh,
And uh, more things we aren't supposed to say. an ethnic minority from an ethnic group where misogyny is rampant and accepted and expected.
And it's not manosphere, it's culture. So,
Exactly.
so number 2 point, incels are racially diverse, but have lower incomes, are less likely to have high levels of education, and are more likely to be NEET, which stands for not in education, employment, or training. Number 3, of the top 25 red pill influencers, only 27% of them are white. None, as far as I could find, have educational attainment beyond a bachelor's degree, and most don't have that. Number 4, only 15% of white youth between 16 and 25 viewed Andrew Tate positively versus 44% of black youth and 33% of Asian youth, Middle Eastern, and Indian. So all of those combined. Liberal feminists have focused for a long time on the systemic oppression and intersection between privilege and power, where white men were the apex predators. And this goes back to that Matlock example, too.
This goes back to the frickin' bear.
Yeah, the bear in the woods. Yeah.
Speaking of apex predators.
But they have done so at the expense of focusing on mundane, explicit misogyny and violence against women, which you were pointing out. But he's going to point out in detail here. Number 1 bullet point on that statement: individuals of lower socioeconomic status are about twice as likely to perpetrate domestic violence and to hold misogynistic attitudes or beliefs. Okay, so part of that is misogyny, but the other part of that is, as we've talked about from Sapolsky's work, when the alpha beats down the beta doesn't go find another alpha to fight. The beta finds a less beta person
Mm,
or primate to fight. And so we take that to a low socioeconomic status individual. Work beats them down. They go home and beat their wife.
mhm.
That's the step-by-step process of it. It's not right, but that's the process.
Well, it's why so much of the rampant open racism, as opposed to one of my frustrations with that word is we use that word for everything, as opposed to bigotry or prejudice existent in the upper classes, the blatant, rampant, often violent racism of the American South mostly came from poor whites
Mm-hmm.
because, hey, who's someone I can beat down to make myself feel better? Oh, the blacks. We even have laws to reinforce that. So that tracks historically. This is
Well,
not a new phenomenon. This is just a new application.
and this is a furthering of a cycle. His second bullet point here: Black and Hispanic individuals have rates of domestic violence about twice as high on their communities. So you talked about, okay, I'm going to go beat the next door neighbor who
Mhm.
is of lower status than me because of, systemic racism when it did exist, right? Well, now that person is going to take it out on the next person, which might be the spouse or the child, right? Number 3, immigrants to Western nations, particularly in Europe, where they hail from Middle Eastern, African, or Indian regions, are many times more likely to perpetrate domestic violence. And what was SA? Did he
Spousal abuse,
spousal
I
abuse?
assume.
Probably, yeah. They also hold substantially more patriarchal or misogynistic norms. Well, that's duh. You come from a place which has harems. I think you are a more patriarchal society. Uh, so, put another way, the upper classes and the high income, the educated, or the elite are the least likely to be radicalized into misogynistic ideologies and the least likely to pose a physical threat to women. So, all of this in the face of what the message is, as we pull up another article from the Daily Mail in the UK. Dire warning issued following the release of Netflix Adolescence. Stupid advertisements. Uh, over tsunami of boys turning to misogyny, as experts say the show is not fiction. A tsunami of people turning to this.
Well, but yes, because why? Back to the headline and back to something we talked about last time with that article from Tablet Magazine and the group of experts who self credential each other. So you have this quote unquote expert class, and they're experts because their circle of like minded colleagues all credential each other, but the credentials are crap, and they redefine misogyny. It is the same exact thing. I think we've talked about this before of during the second Obama term when they tried to push the war on women narrative, they came out with a stat that was something like 1 in 4 young women in college were sexually assaulted, which is just a ludicrous number. Yeah, we have talked about this because you brought up the actual statistics for the general population to show how crazy that would be if
Mm-hmm.
that was actually happening. Well, the way they came up with that is, again, a graduate student did a survey that asked a number of questions. Things like, have you ever had sex and then regretted it the next day or later? Yes. Okay, that was sexual assault because that wasn't actually consent, because you can post hoc revoke your consent by
Mm-hmm.
regretting it. That's how they come up with these numbers. That's how they come up with a tsunami of misogyny. You simply redefine what misogyny is.
Okay, so I'm going to read this last passage from this article of the tsunami of influencers and stuff. Okay, but this behavior is not limited to the classroom. The evidence is increasingly clear that we shouldn't be allowing children unrestricted access to harmful content, which is why we are bringing in much wider protection for children online. The evidence is clear. So now let's go to our foremost researcher on this population, William Costello, out of UT. And you know what? I'm going to have to get out of this because I did not share with sound. But now we are sharing with sound. Okay, so this is William. Now, I have not watched this full episode, but I just came across it about 5 minutes ago before we started recording, and you better guarantee I'm watching the rest of it as soon as we're done. But this is William Costello, and the intro is actually all we need for this episode.
The film was powerful. I thought it made some really important points. I'm almost certain it's going to cause a moral panic.
It's somewhat disconcerting for me, having researched this topic, to see this show being brought up in Parliament. Policy decisions from our politicians should be based on sober research rather than a piece of performance art. Violence towards others and killing people, mass shootings and things like that, is not the only harm associated with incel ideology. You have an opportunity cost of a generation of young men kind of giving up on dating. I should be clear that the evidence for these manosphere-inspired violence, like Jamie, is very thin on the ground. There hasn't been a whole lot of cases like this.
William, well,
That's all we need as far as what I was going for there. Again, this is the person who has followed it for his entire academic career. He's the most published author on this subject. And nobody's listening to him when he's saying, wow, we're looking the wrong direction. We're looking in the wrong place for the fix to this. And I've got one more on that, but I'm going to let you comment.
Well, this is the first thing I thought about when you brought up this topic, and about the how something like this show Adolescence is going to create, in Kissin's word, a moral panic, which we have had plenty of in history, and we have repeatedly lately because we've become such a neurotic culture, is why we don't have nuclear power in the United States. And it's incredibly stupid because it all comes from
limited. We do have some.
Very, very, very limited. And considering we are the originators of the nuclear age, you would think we would have the most. And yet, I believe it is France. Well, they did. I don't know if they still do. They took a lot offline.
No, that's why they're still doing well during this whole Russia-Ukraine thing, because
at
they
one point,
they were basically the propagators of the micronuclear plant, which is actually the solution to the problem. Yeah.
And I believe the stat was, at one point, I don't know if it's still true, they had over 80% of their electricity generation coming from nuclear. It's one of the reasons that there's this massive international effort to build what is called a tokamak reactor, which is the best option for fusion, and it's being built in France
Yeah,
for that reason.
I mean, I'm excited about this. I don't want to be Debbie Downer. This is actually exciting news. Is in the last 2 years, we had the first net positive fusion energy production. The problem is it was net positive it could brew you a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fusion is hard because you need the gravity and heat of the sun to do it. And that's
yeah, it's why we can make fusion bombs, but fusion power is a little more tricky. Anyway,
fusion bombs wouldn't work because it implodes instead of explodes.
No, that is an H bomb is a fusion bomb that is triggered by a fission reactor.
Oh, okay.
A fission reaction smashes the hydrogen together, and that is what creates the H bomb. That is how much power is required to create
fission. Is breaking apart.
Exactly. Yeah. So an H bomb triggers a miniature nuclear explosion in order to generate the power required to create fusion. Anyway, point being, we should have tons of nuclear power in the United States because we created it. We don't because of one stupid movie called China Syndrome. And it was a big movie because it had Jane Fonda and Jack Lemmon in it, who were big actors at the time. I think Michael Douglas might have been in it too. Anyway, it created this ludicrously fictitious scenario of what would happen in a nuclear meltdown, in a reactor meltdown. And this came out in the late 70s. And just coincidentally, while it was still in theaters, 3 Mile Island happened. And people freaked the heck out. The facts are that 3 Mile Island was a comedy of errors, and it was almost impossible for what happened to have happened. And there was a series of some technological failures, but mostly personnel failures. And in the end, the facts are that the people within the radius of the expulsion of the radioactive cloud received what was roughly equal to a single X-ray's worth of radiation. But because people freaked the hell out, we don't get to have nuclear power in the United States.
Okay, let's push that. So we talked propaganda and you've supported it there. Let's push that to the idea of self-fulfilling prophecy and the point of activism, right? The point of activism is to create the problem and engage the reaction, right? So and this is UK is doing this. It's not the US that the articles I brought up. The UK is going to introduce the anti-misogyny training to adolescent boys, right? Because that's the problem. It's adolescent boys in school. That's the problem, that are being influenced by influencers. You're only going to push them to the influencers. The counter reaction is always going to be equal to the reaction. And if you're going to do something as extreme as what I would equate to struggle sessions with boys going through puberty, you're going to push them in the direction of the manosphere, quote unquote, the pretend manosphere, which is going to cause the problem that you are saying you are preventing. And you're going to say, see, told you so, when you actually caused it. But don't take my word for it. Let's go back to Costello's colleague, Alexander Dateside here. Boys don't need anti-misogyny training in school. They need classes and sports teams.
Shop classes. That's the
shop classes. Yeah, I missed the word. Sorry.
For anyone who are international audience, that is your shop is your
woodworking, automobile repair.
Yes, woodworking, auto repair,
welding.
They did welding at my son's shop class in the high school here, which I thought was great. So that is your blue collar skills class.
So
teaching you how to make things with your hands.
Continuing the quote, this is not boomerism, but based on what actually works as an intervention. We know going to schools and telling kids, don't do this bad thing doesn't work. and even runs the risk of making the undesirable behavior seem desirable. I can't remember if I talked about DARE on this before, but this is something that I've been harping on for a little while. The old DARE, which just stands for, was it drug, alcohol?
Poop. I can't remember. It's been so long.
Okay,
But
so
it
it was the
started in the early
yeah, it was
80s.
yeah, it started in the early 80s. It was the keep kids off drugs kind of campaign. The old DARE program is an example.
Drug abuse resistance education.
Okay, there we go. Good job, fact checker. Good job, Jamie.
We're in Texas, so I'm Jaime.
Jaime. Cops come into, well, Jamie is Rogan's guy.
I know.
Yeah. Cops come into school and tell children not to use drugs. The vast majority of kids at that age were not interested in using drugs in the first place. Somehow, demographics that had DARE programs were more likely to go on to end up using drugs. Telling people don't do bad thing is a bad intervention across the board. What works is providing alternatives. Now, off the quote, I'll add an additional thing to it. When you make something look popular, kids are more likely to do it. So if you went to an area where doing drugs wasn't popular, but you came out with a message of don't do what these other kids are doing because it's bad for you, all of a sudden it became popular in the kids' minds. So it actually increased. It was, again, we see it. Someone was talking about this the other day. Marty our new FDA director, Marty McCary, he was talking about the anti-suicide programs have posters in schools now that are like, all the kids are doing it, but don't do it.
What?
If you tell, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but if you tell kids all the kids are doing it, they're going to do it. Yeah, there's not going to be many kids to do it if you do that thing. So don't do it. Okay, so back to the quote. This is why we see anecdotes like boxing saved me from gang life, and also supporting data behind those anecdotes. Sports participation has a causal effect. Causal effect, off the quote, of reducing gang, drug, all of these other activities. So boys face a position in life where they have no status. This is part of why we see high antisocial behavior in adolescence, and why we see an age crime curve where most crime is committed by the age of 16 to 25 in groups of men. Antisocial attitudes and behaviors are driven by status seeking and exclusion from dominance hierarchies, in parentheses, and other things such as individual differences in our genes and part of the picture. So you end up with boys who go a bad way, who tend to be ostracized losers, especially in low status. They easily get sucked into radical ideologies. They have a lot of resentment for the world around them or for target groups. Now, off the script here, this is what we see in school shootings. It's not the high school quarterback who ever shoots up a school, right? It's not the head cheerleader. It's not even the number one debate team kid. It's always some loner kid who can't fit in with everybody else and is like, quote unquote, the loser of the class. Back to the thing, number 2, the low status, high aggression group. These are boys who go on to commit crimes. Effective interventions will target the esteem and status of boys, providing them a new dominance hierarchy to work within and reducing isolation. Providing supportive peers and mentors. Sports team will do this, but also back to his previous point, shop classes and stuff like that will also do that, because they give you an avenue to make money as an adult. And what's better for your status, living in your basement, living in your parents' basement, or actually making a living in an auto repair shop and being able to
put a pin in that, because that's my point that I'm about to segue to.
Yeah. Effective interventions will also teach boys pro-social and creative skills. Again, yeah, you're working with other people, right? You will make friends. How about that? That's a great thing. Shop classes do this. Give them focus and an interest in a skill that they can go forward into society. End quote.
And this is part of the redefinition of misogyny, is a boy, a young man, being assertive is misogyny. Being confident in yourself is misogyny. I mean, This is where mansplaining comes from.
Hell, asking a girl out to prom these days is misogyny.
Look, I don't like the guy. I don't think he's funny. The Indian comedian who was on Community, or no, Parks and Rec, I think, and he's been on some other stuff. And he got caught up in, I think, one of the first Me Too's to make people reassess Me Too, because this girl came out complaining about this guy and how basically trying to claim Me Too virtue, which I use that word purposely. And people looked at her story and went, "You just had a bad date, honey." And it was embarrassing to him, but it wasn't anything to Me Too over. And yet, from her perspective, going back to what I mentioned earlier, where we got the 1 in 4 sexual assaults come from, she had been inculcated, plus the fame chasing, the notoriety chasing, that I'm going to put this out there because this means something. No, it doesn't, honey. You just had a bad date. And me saying that is misogynistic mansplaining, as opposed to pointing out an objective fact. And what makes this so difficult to untangle and connects to what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks of the difficulty in deprogramming ourselves both individually and culturally from what social media is doing to our brains, is that we were prepared for what social media is doing to our brains because of a crappy education system that has for decades now been getting worse and worse and worse. Where does intersectionalism come from? It comes from academia. And the reason it's so toxic is because intersectionalism says, no, you can't point out that ethnic minority did this bad thing because he's oppressed. So of course we have to race and class swap this boy. I think the perpetrator was actually 18. This boy, in this adolescent story, of course we have to race and class swap him.
Yeah, to the credit of the Daily Mail, in those articles, if you're watching this and you want to read the whole article, they actually bring up a section where it tells the real story behind it.
And they even showed the mugshot of the guy, which I was surprised by.
Yeah, which actually flipped forward when I was scrolling down earlier.
Yeah.
If you're watching this. But also I want to read one more little part. I'm not going to bring up the screen, but just from the article, the development comes as a win for the Netflix show's co-writers, Jack Thorne and actor Stephen Graham, who stars as the teen boy's father, who have said they wanted Adolescence to be a program, in quotes from those writers, causes discussion and makes changes. Okay, so what are the changes we're talking about? Let's go to the misogyny training. Now let's get a meta picture here. And this is something I've been kind of working on in my head and thinking about, because look at the UK compared to the US right now. The main difference is how our elections went last time. The UK is a little ahead of us, because what do we have in common? We have rampant illegal immigration. We have a very highly polarized, we'll call it a congressional assembly. Theirs is the parliament, ours is the congressional, is the Congress and the Senate. And we have leaders that seem to be our only choices at any given time, right? What is the thing what are the two things we're trying to avoid as a nation if we're talking about the United States? If we should be any Western nation, but if we're specifically talking about the United States, they're equally as bad. Communism and fascism, right? Equally as bad, the two things we're trying to avoid. Well, obviously we know where the wokies want to go. They want to go to communism. And the wokies own Hollywood. That's why Hollywood was allowed to run during COVID, because it is the propaganda arm. And whether it's fascist or communist, the propaganda arm is needed for it to happen, right? What is the number one defense against communism? especially in America.
Well, I'm curious where you're going. I would say localism, or
No.
at least what it should have been.
Think of differences. Think of sex differences. Men who believe in merit and hierarchy.
Mm,
Merit and hierarchy are the different are antithesis to communism. What is the purpose of anti-misogyny training? To create male girls.
and to my point, yeah, that is something I have been ranting about for a while, is we used to teach that locally. We used to teach that on the micro level, something I've been ranting about, but besides it's just dumb and not good physically for the kids. Sports specialization and an an over the top focus for you need to do this to progress to the next level. No, it used to be you need to do this because it teaches you valuable life skills. You need to take shop class because it teaches you valuable life skills. Go, I'm not going to hire someone to mow the grass. Get out there, son, and mow the grass.
Mm-hmm.
And no, that was wrong. Do it like this, do it right. Why? It teaches valuable life skills, especially to young boys who you want to turn into young men, not faux women, not feminized boys who can shave.
And I'm not even going to say it's male and female because, again, I always bring the statistic up about the high percentage of female CEOs were competitive athletes.
Mm-hmm.
It is people that believe in merit-based hierarchy.
Okay.
That is the defense for defense against the socialism that always digresses into communism. And the people who want that thing to happen, they call themselves democratic socialisms, but you cannot have democratic socialism because you always have to force people to do something to have that. So you can't have democratic something that forces people to do something. And
to your point about how men being men are what is required to stand up against
the masculine being masculine. How about
yes,
that? Yes,
the masculine being masculine. This is one of the most gut-wrenching, horrific things I've ever heard. And as much as I want to sympathize with someone who is in so much emotional pain, I also want to slap this guy across the face, like old school TV style, when the person's being hysterical and you slap them. No, let's go airplane style. You got people lining up to slap the hysterical person. This, I couldn't believe it when I first heard someone play this clip. I was like, this can't be real. All right, so this is from the Columbus Dispatch from 2024. And the background for this is Aiden Clark, 11, was killed August 22nd, 2023, when the Northwestern local schools bus he was riding aboard was struck by a minivan driven by Armani Joseph, a Haitian immigrant, an illegal Haitian immigrant, and overturned. Joseph was found guilty of aggravated vehicular homicide and involuntary manslaughter in May.
I like the term criminal migrant because nobody is illegal, but they do illegal things. So
that's a good point.
Yeah.
That is a good rebuttal to the no one's illegal. Okay, well, he is a criminal because he's doing criminal things. And the point that people were making during the campaign and using this and other instances, I forget the Jocelyn, the girl in Houston, the 12-year-old girl in Houston.
Oh,
that
her family looks so miserable at that speech.
I know.
I felt I actually had tears in my eyes.
Yeah. But she was another one of, this person should not have been here, so this 12-year-old girl should still be alive. This 11-year-old boy should still be alive. And what does his father say in a city, I believe this is the city council meeting, and he says, as the headline says, my son wasn't murdered. Stop using Aiden Clark's death to vomit hate about immigrants. And he goes on to say, quote, I wish that my son, Aiden Clark, was killed by a 60-year-old white man.
How about I wish my son wasn't dead? That'd be
Yeah.
nice.
And his wife, puffy faced and red eyed, is standing there nodding along with him.
I mean, on the scale of Liam Neeson to John Wick, how would you feel if your child was killed?
Mhm,
Yeah. There's no other scale that applies right there.
mhm. How did this happen? And why is it so difficult to untangle? And why is seemingly young men and boys, the ship is turning, but women are getting worse? Well, here's some interesting statistics. This one, here we go. Now, I was trying to find a breakdown of by degree, and I'll tell you why in a second, but let's just look at total college enrollment. Okay. Now, this particular graph that I've got up, if you're just listening along, is a bar graph with male and female, but then also ethnic breakdowns. I'm just interested right now in the male versus female. Okay. In 2012, you had 38% of 18 to 24-year-old men enrolled in college. By 2022, that had dropped to 34%. Females stayed the same.
Yeah.
So you already had more, 44%, and now that difference is climbing. Okay. Let's jump over here to this tab, because the reason I was looking for a breakdown of types of degrees is because I have seen plenty of stats that women much more get humanities degrees, gets Bachelor of Arts degrees, not
Mhm.
Bachelor of Science degrees. But you can see that in the postgraduate degrees,
Mhm.
because more and more of these humanities, or what I sometimes call the soft sciences, the social sciences, they are more and more requiring that you get a graduate degree to do anything with it. And those numbers are very significant.
Almost 2 to 1 with
So
masters.
you
And
have
a little
so
less so with doctorates, but I would assume like things like physics, where you really have trouble having a job without a doctorate's degree, would play into the fact that males went back up there.
yeah.
But master's degrees, yeah, social workers abound, right?
Yep.
Your master's of education, which would be your school administrators, your assistant superintendents, your things like that. So
You've
so
talked
yeah,
plenty about how psych is
I,
overwhelmingly female.
I told you my stats class demographics.
Yep.
I actually officially have them because I ran an experiment in my stats class. It is
Mhm.
it is 20-2.
Mhm. And so you see, and this is pretty recent. This is from the 2021 to 22 school year, and it was degrees conferred in that year. So pretty recent. And you see an almost 2-to-1 difference in female to male master's degrees, and then 105,000 to 72,000 in doctorate degrees. So it's not just that they're going to college, it is that they are going to indoctrination centers and getting crappy degrees that reinforce that indoctrination.
Oh yeah, next semester I get my oh shit, let me look up the exact terminology for this here.
Oh,
Uh so we have to have one class that is considered under this umbrella, and let me look it up. Or I'll look it up while you go through your next point.
so this came up um, a couple of weeks ago. I was with some work friends of my wife, and they were talking about workplace gossip and nonsense. And the idea of, well, it's because he's got lots of money. And I couldn't help but pipe up, well, actually, something Peterson says a lot, which is very important, is that it's not the money per se. Yes, there are gold diggers out there, but it is that money is a useful stand-in for competence. If you have a particular job earning a particular amount, then that is seen as, oh, you are a competent man because you are able to accomplish things. In much the same way that there are lots of employers that don't care what degree you have. They just want you to have a 4-year degree because that is a useful stand-in for work ethic and competency. Okay, you can focus and get a task done and accomplish things. So now I don't care what the degree is in because we will train you on the job to do what we need you to do. And you have demonstrated that you are presumably capable of doing that. Well, it occurred to me, and I bit my tongue, it didn't go down the rabbit hole that jumped into my head when I pointed that out, is that this is a big reason why that gulf between men and women keeps widening, because you have, so
Yeah, I wanted to bring up a feminist argument to the chart you brought up.
yes,
Would be that, oh, less men are going to college because there are more options for them outside of college, i.e. line worker, welder, all that stuff, which is
those
a
jobs
stupid
are open to
argument from
women
a
too,
feminist
but
perspective. They're open to them, yes.
yep.
Yeah.
Nothing is stopping women from going there.
Well, and more,
they
and
don't want
let's
to.
face it. I mean, what's the percentage of men that go to the military versus women? You know,
Exactly.
yeah.
So
Okay, so
that,
so I did look it up. Hold on.
okay.
You have to have 3 hours, which is one class in grad school, of psychological diversity. And here are your 3 options: aging, development of gender and racial identity, or psychology of gender, race, and sexuality. Can you guess which one I picked?
Those all sound delightful, but I'm guessing you're going with the gender one for funsies.
No, aging. I went with the
Okay.
one that I'm actually going to be the oppressed in the class.
Ah, nice.
I've been waiting 4 semesters for that class to pop up on my available classes. And so I'm in aging, except I know another girl in the class who's older than me, and she's taking the same damn class in the same time. So I'm like, God, I'm not the oldest person in the class, because I know I'm older than the professor because I had her for neuro. So I just want to say the whole class be like, are you denying my lived experience?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, they are, because lived experience, they like to use that phrase, but they don't actually mean it.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the point I'm getting at is that one of the problems with this gulf between men and women, and I think, again, back to social media, I would add dating apps into social media because I think they're the same kind of mechanism. And you put on their degree, like your most of them that I've seen have highest level of school finished, right? Well, these women are going to think you're an idiot if you don't have at least a 4-year degree. You could be making twice what they're making, and it doesn't matter because you're a dummy because you didn't go to college.
DatePsych had posted, and I wish I would have had this ready because it's way back. I would have to search through his stuff. The difference between on a dating app putting a high school, trade school, master's, and doctorate, and the jump was massive between bachelor and master's. Like, it was the difference between being 5'11" and 6 foot on your dating profile, you know, where the jump in filters is like 80%. So it was astronomical. But yeah, but at the same time, less men are getting those degrees, more women are getting those degrees. And when you talk dating apps and you set your filter, you are eliminating at that point 80% of your dating pool. Even though the guy might be a millionaire because he's a master welder who has 10 other master welder apprentices underneath him, you know? So it's ridiculous. We need to get to your stuff. So we're talking academia. We're talking, did you have anything else from your tabs to show. Okay, so I thought this was a good segue when you sent me what you wanted to talk about. But I'm going to bring in what I brought up at the end of last time first because it's important. It is the AMA guidelines on the Guide to Language, Narrative,
Oh
and
gosh, yeah.
right? Because it is actually directly relevant to what you sent me.
Hmm.
So we get through the preamble, we get through the land labor acknowledgement. So you already know it's woke.
Jeez.
Uh, the glossary, introduction, and then we get to advancing health equity. And as we've been over many times, if you see equity instead of equality, that's important because equal opportunity versus equal outcomes. Equal outcomes are impossible unless you force it. That's why democratic socialism doesn't work because it ceases to be democratic because you have to force people to do something. Okay. Or you kill them like Stalin did. But now we get down to the figure one here, the narrative ecosystem. You know, you have the message at the bottom. It's the base of the pyramid. Words, images, or sounds that convey an idea of or belief. This is your Hollywood. This is where Hollywood comes in. This is where music comes in. American Idol. Everything after American Idol in pop is the same damn thing. It's 4 chords with a message. Okay.
Yeah.
Story, an account or a series of related events. So these are your anecdotes to fit it. This is George Floyd, right?
Yeah.
This is Michael Brown. This is all of those things. Okay. The narrative. So now we're taking from that story and the message and a collection of stories, messages that represent an idea or belief. Narratives highlight values, define the problems, causes, and determine the solutions and actions. And then the deep narrative, deeply held values that have been repeated and reproduced over time. They are baked in. Where have we heard that before in history? Where have we heard that? History buff.
Nowhere good.
We had it as one of our thumbnails at one point.
Which one?
Goebbels.
Oh, the
Tell a lie, tell it
a lie
enough,
often enough. Yeah.
often enough, and it becomes the truth in people's minds, right? So that's the deep narrative. If you tell the lie, if you start it with a message as a lie, Hollywood, and then you have a story, something that fits that message, right? Because the Matlock example, it is not the norm in the workplace, but it happens. So if you can find the time it happens and then bring that forward after people have been delivered the message for a long time, then that goes to the narrative. You combine the two. And then the narrative becomes this always happens. And then you get the deeply held narrative. You keep telling it and telling it and telling it to where anybody on the street, you say, hey, does this happen in the workplace? They go, oh, yeah, I saw. Yeah. I mean, it's just everywhere all the time when it was on a TV show and it happened once in real life, just like this Adolescence show.
20 years ago, there was a poll out that the average American thought that the percentage of gay, lesbian, or bisexual, because this was before the total alphabet rainbow, the percentage of the population that was gay, lesbian, or bisexual was 25 to 30%. It was actually 3 to 10%. But the reason they thought this is because even at that time, even before the gay marriage rulings from the Supreme Court, there were so many homosexual characters in media that people assumed that there were that many in the general population.
Okay, so I'm going to continue on this document. Again, this is the AMA, American Medical Association. This is an official document. Much is at stake in whose narratives dominate, receive traction, and thrive. Narratives grounded in white supremacy and sustaining structural racism, for example, perpetuate, and this is what's going to lead us to your article, sustaining structural racism, for example, perpetuate cumulative disadvantage for some populations and cumulative advantage for white people, and especially white men. Patriarchal narratives enforce rigidly defined traditional norms and reinforce inequities based on gender. Sex, I would say, if you're actually a scientist, but they say gender. Narratives that uncritically center meritocracy and individualism render invisible the very real constraints generated and reinforced by poverty, discrimination, and ultimately exclusion. Okay, so we've got that. So now let's get to your article.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you sent me this link. I do not know who JP Green is, so you'll have to vouch for him. Him, or I'm assuming gender, him. But
So the whole point of what we're kind of building to here, to the climax, Giggity, is this is all built on a foundation of garbage. So the idea that college degrees infer some kind of status, that, you know, here's your gold star for a job well done. No, this is all built, not just the narrative, but the industry that supports the narrative is all built on garbage.
all right. Sorry for the hiccup. Had to take a quick bathroom break, but we're going to wrap things up. Oh, you were in the middle of a point.
No, go ahead. This is, I don't know what it was about this that triggered me so much, that you know what, this is a bright shining example of the awfulness that we are talking about here.
Yeah. Okay. So for those that are just listening, especially if you can't see the screen, so this JP Green comments that he's starting his thread. The study claims Black doctors save lives of Black babies must be cursed. Its results have been misdescribed. It has failed to be replicated by other researchers, and now a FOIA reveals the authors hid results that undermine their desired narrative. Okay, so I just brought up the AMA and their focus on narrative. The story he has a picture of, but he did not link, which bothered me. Exclusive. Researchers axed data point undermining narrative that white doctors are biased against Black babies. And so I went through this thread, going through everything, and what he talks about here is our Supreme Court Justice actually cited this paper
Yep.
in one of her dissents, which turns out that it was an affirmative action dissent where she said the study showed having a Black doctor doubles the odds of Black newborns to survive. Okay, so this is one of the narratives when it comes to DEI, and we saw this during the fires in California when the chief was talking about, oh, wouldn't you like someone who looked like you showing up when you're in a fire? And, you know, and this is the idea, one of the ideas behind diversity, equity, and inclusion is if you are a certain sex or ethnic group, you would actually be more likely to have good results if your doctor were of the same, because you would be more comfortable, you would be more likely to listen, they would actually be, and ultimately they would be more empathetic to you because they look like you and they identify with you as well. So basically a doctor cannot do their job unless they identify more with the patient, which is an absurd statement. Because you should be able to diagnose and treat based on the facts of the case, not on what you feel. Okay. That's why psychopaths make great doctors. I'm sorry, because they actually can tune that out when they're talking to their patients. They can say, no, this is what you need and this is why. Okay. But that's beside the point. So we're going into this study, and then people try to replicate it, including a Harvard economist. They try to replicate the study, and the effects disappeared when you controlled for newborns having a low weight. Okay. So if the child was born with a low weight, they're actually more likely to die.
Mhm.
Now this gets further, and we're going to stick with green, but put a pin in that thought with the low weight. Now the FOIA reveals notes by authors showing that they intend to omit a finding that white babies were more likely to survive if they had a white rather than black doctors, because the result undermines the narrative. Okay, and then he shows the actual FOIA request, which I'll blow up a little bigger here on the screen. So the study originally asserted that white babies died less frequently with white doctors, and it shows that that actually wasn't the case. But in the FOIA request, they found that they actually purposefully admitted that fact, because as the study's lead author, Brad Greenwood, wrote in the margins, "I'd rather not focus on this. If we're telling the story from the perspective of saving Black infants, this undermines the narrative," as we just talked about, creating the narrative, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
And back to the intersectionalism of, it is perfectly fine. You can have this cognitive dissonance because it's more important to spread the narrative than tell the truth.
Okay, so this commenter, let me see. Okay, yeah, this was the one. I'm glad it showed up right away, because I was afraid extra commenters were gonna like dilute it and I was gonna have trouble finding it. But Rigel Dog, I have no idea who you are, but kudos to this comment. It says, "Isn't the study also fatally flawed because Black physicians are also less likely to be treating the sickest of Black babies? Most neonatal expert doctors are not Black. Thus, Black doctors were more likely to be treating healthier Black babies to begin with." This is actually an extremely important point. I know it wasn't the point of the thread, but this commenter like really jumped out at me because yes, we are going through a period where it is going to take time for more minority and female people to be put into positions of greater responsibility because these things take time. So we've got a bunch of crusty old 60-year-old white boys, white guys working in these very complex situations because they started 40 years ago in this process. Whereas after all of the equality movements, a lot of their counterparts of other ethnicities are starting 20 years ago. Okay, so we actually do have a discrepancy there, but that's actually going to skew the data because you're actually working with the sickest of patients. And if you're working with the sickest of patients, you're going to have a higher mortality rate. So not only do we have quotes from the authors saying, let's not include this data because it messes the narrative, but you also have real life growing pains of an industry where it's going to put a different demographic in front of the most complex situations, which is going to have a higher failure rate. If you're in a NICU and you have a 50% survival rate, that is different than you just being in a standard OB/GY clinic and having a 50% failure rate. Because one is patients or children delivered with extreme health problems, and one is all children delivered.
Yeah, it's like comparing the fatality rates of a general practitioner versus a cancer specialist.
Yeah, exactly.
One, slightly different, guys. But the bigger point being, and that I went back and I looked, the article that he was going off of was from the Daily Caller, and I believe they're the ones who put in the FOIA request in order to get the raw data for this so-called study. And again, the point is, this is an example. This is hardly a one-off. Okay, you have, did you have some of the papers from
I do. I do. Hold on. I'm bringing up
back in
something
the
else here.
day
Yeah.
to remind us that
Okay. So
this isn't new.
this thing exists, and this is something I have to adhere to if I was to do research in my field. Open source data. Okay. Free databases. You're supposed to put your data out there. Why we needed a FOIA request for the data from this thing that was impactful for all of
Yeah.
US culture is because things were exposed at one point. And okay, no, that's the AMA thing. Oh, here we go. Okay, so we the hoax papers here. And one of the reasons they got away with this is because no one asked for their data. Let's go to the dog park study. For those that are not familiar with the hoax papers, it is in the paper here, it says Helen Wilson, but I'm pretty sure that's Helen Pluckrose. Helen Pluckrose, James Lindsay, and Peter Boghossian went on a venture to publish 10 papers, or 20 papers, 20 papers that they completely made up. And what they did was they took concepts and they applied social justice frameworks to them and then submitted them to different papers. And this one got published in the Journal of Feminist Geography, Gender, Place, and Culture. Human Reactions to Rape Culture and Queer Performativity in Urban Dog Parks in Portland, Oregon. Yeah, this one was great. They talk about examining thousands of dogs in a dog park and interviewing their owners and studying whether the dogs participated in misogynistic rape culture. This one got published. Let's talk about this one. Queering Plato, Plato's allegory of the cave as a queer theoretical emancipatory text on sexuality and gender. This article queers Plato by focusing upon Plato's allegory of the cave as a fitting figurative account consistent with the theoretical and practical aims of queer theory and its application. To queer Plato, it applies thematic elements in Judith Butler's work, like the heterosexuality matrix and the emphasis on gender as being anti-essentialist, to show how Socrates' view of the forms can be understood as a precursor and a theoretical underpinning of much of Butler's scholarship. So not only are they writing these things just to mess with people, they are actually satirizing their...
My favorite one, which didn't get published, but I heard I think it was Lindsay talking about this, that they took a section of Mein Kampf where he's ranting about the Jews and just replaced it with misogyny. So instead of ranting about Jews, it's ranting about men and misogyny. It wasn't rejected because they recognized what it was or because it was too extreme. The peer reviewers had suggestions to flesh it out and make it more publishable. But it wasn't because this is insane. No, we're not publishing. It was no, you just need to do a little more work. But yeah, we could see this being published with a little more work.
Yeah, and then they got caught. I think that was Rebraiding Masculinity, Redefining the Struggle of Women Under the Dominion of the Masculine Trinity. Yeah.
What a title. Yeah.
But there was also one where they claimed to have done an experiment where you chain white men down to their desk, or white boys down to their desk, to experience the oppression that was of their minority.
Yikes.
Yeah, and my favorite, it's my favorite because it won awards, not only got published.
Oh, geez.
And it is still cited to this day because not everybody is privy to the fact that it got retracted, is the conceptual penis. The conceptual penis is if you give straight white men female products for pleasuring themselves to use on themselves, they would actually be more receptive to feminist ideologies. And
oh boy.
Yeah. Yeah, but no, this is the problem.
And when did that
the
come
narrative
out?
is the point, and that was their point. They put the narrative into the 2016, I think.
Okay, yeah. I was thinking 15 or 16, somewhere around there. So again, almost a decade, and
But even
nothing's
though
changing.
we have open source and stuff like that now, it is still going on, as you just pointed out with this, because there's always the big things. Oh, well, they treat minority people different in the hospital because they assume they can take more pain. And I'm like, well, maybe it's actually the person, because when I go into the hospital, they stick me and they do things, and because I don't react, they do it more and often and harder. Maybe it's because I'm reacting that way, and maybe it's actually my culture that does it. And I grew up a poor redneck white boy. You don't flinch when you get stuck with a needle that's like a 2 gauge. It's not a big deal. Whereas some people, oh my God, a needle. They're going to stick you harder. They're going to stick you faster because you just don't react. Well, okay, that's not on the doctor. That's on the person getting stuck. If you're actually afraid of that and you feel the pain, tell your doctor, I feel pain. I deal with this in my job. Someone says, oh, I hurt myself because you gave me that. I'm like, you kept doing it. I was going by how you were reacting. I don't know what you feel. I know how you look. Your form was good. You looked fine. You didn't tell me it was too much. You didn't tell me it was too little. I can only go by what you do. And same with doctors. So, but yeah, this is to stick to the subject. The narrative is the point. That's why we brought up the hoax papers. That's why the FOIA request exposed the illegitimacy of the paper, and the paper affects how policy works, because now we have to fast forward or fast track people who do not deserve to be doctors through the process just because they look a certain way. And I want them to be there, but I want them to be there because they deserve to be there.
Yep.
Which means we need to fix the schools from the bottom, not at the top from the executive control.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's enough yelling at clouds for me. I no clue what we'll be talking about next week, but I'm sure there will be something dumb that pops up and makes us go, why
we
is
got
this
plenty,
a thing?
Yeah.
But
Yeah, there's just
next
so much
time we'll
going
have
on. Yeah.
another episode of Wheel of Time to talk about.
Only one
surely.
episode this time. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And we actually have a new follower who just finished A Memory of Light. Commented on one of our other ones. So we'll bring up her comment on this one. Hopefully she's watching both, because obviously she probably came on with the new show being the new. We're getting members faster in this month than we have in the last 2 years. So.
Amusingly, from some of the people I watch and listen to, it might be because season 1 and 2 were so disastrous that people are just checked out. And even people whose job, they are full-time YouTubers and this is the stuff they do, they can't be bothered. They're like, yeah, I don't care. I'm not watching it. I don't care. I'll talk about other stuff. It's crap.
Yeah, well, it's only 4 episodes, so I am going to go ahead and watch Adolescence based on this episode. I do have a client that watched the first episode and she said she couldn't go on because they made it so disturbing. But I'm pretty hardened to that kind of stuff when it comes to entertainment. So I'm going to go ahead and watch it and make sure I commented correctly on all the hype. But it's the fact that policy is coming out of it that's the problem.
Well,
but yeah,
that is one of the things I've heard, is that one of the reasons it is so bad is because it's so good, like technically speaking.
So from like an acting, directing,
yeah,
cinematography perspective. Okay. So that'll actually be worth a watch. I will spend my time on that, even if I don't agree with the message, if it's done well. And that's the part that Hollywood doesn't get, is because they keep saying, oh, you didn't watch Snow White because of your bigotry or whatever. It's like, no, you did a shitty job too. If you did a great job, I would kind of push the message aside for a second.
I use the analogy about the China Syndrome, which is a crap movie, technically speaking, but it's compelling because it's really well done. That's why it's so terrible. That's why it was so impactful, because it freaked people out, because it's so Jaws. I mean, people went on, we said oops after a decade after Jaws because we went around killing sharks and then said, "Oh no, wait, that's bad. We shouldn't do that anymore." Because it was that
great movies
impactful.
though. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess we'll see you next time with Wheel of Time, episode 6, which means I guess we
6.
got 3 more. 6, 7, and 8, aren't they? Or is it 10?
I think it's 8 episodes. The previous ones had been 8, I'm pretty sure.
Netflix is typically
So
10, so I think Amazon is typically 8.
let me double check. Yeah. Yeah, seasons 1 and 2 were each 8 episodes.
Okay.
So we're assuming that's what it's going to be here too.
All right. Any final words?
Well, we'll see y'all next time.
All right. Like, share, subscribe, and comment. Please comment. We love the comments. We always respond to the comments.